The heavy, gold-leaf doors of the Sterling estate didn't just keep the world out. They kept a cold, suffocating silence in. A prominent billionaire pretends to be a beggar to test his maid, and what he discovered left him in shock. This isn't just a story about a man with too much money. It's a journey into the darkest corners of suspicion and the blinding light of a pure soul. We're about to peel back the layers of a life built on marble and ice to find something far more valuable hidden in the shadows. Hello to all of you joining us today. It is truly a pleasure to have you here in our storytelling circle. Whether you're tuning in from the bustling streets of New York, the quiet suburbs of London, or a sunny porch in Lagos, I'm sending you so much warmth and gratitude. How are you all doing today? I hope your week has been filled with small joys. If you haven't already, please take a moment to join our family by hitting that subscribe button and ringing the notification bell. Your support allows us to keep bringing these emotional journeys to life, and I'd love to have you with us for every chapter. Have you subscribed yet? Go ahead, I'll wait. It means the world to me. The rain in Seattle didn't fall, it attacked. It lashed against the jagged rocks of the coastline and turned the manicured gardens of the Thornblackwood Manor into a muddy battlefield. Inside the master suite, Dominic Toretto Vance stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, but he didn't see the man who had just closed a $4 billion acquisition of a global tech firm. Instead, he saw a ghost. His fingers, usually steady enough to sign away fortunes without a tremor, shook as he applied a layer of prosthetic grime to his cheekbones. He rubbed a gray ash-like powder into his hair, dulling the expensive silver at his temples into the matted mess of the forgotten. He donned a coat that smelled of damp wool and despair, a garment he'd bought off a man under a bridge for $500, much to the man's bewildered joy. Dominic was a man who owned the sky but trusted no one on the ground. To him, loyalty was a commodity and kindness was merely a sophisticated form of marketing. For 3 years, a woman named Ellen Ripley Snyder had moved through his home like a ghost. She was his head maid, a woman of few words and downcast eyes. She knew the brand of his soap, the exact temperature he liked his espresso, and the way he threw his silk ties on the floor when he was too tired to care. But did she know him? Or more importantly, did he know her? They all want something, Dominic, he whispered to his reflection, his voice rasping with a bitterness that no amount of vintage scotch could wash away. The board of directors wants my chair. My ex-wife wanted the alimony. And Ellen. Ellen probably wants the combination to the floor safe hidden behind the Caravaggio. The plan was simple, born from a late-night fever of paranoia. He would vanish for 48 hours. His security team, the only 2 men he paid enough to ensure their silence, would report him away on a private retreat. In reality, he would be huddled in the service alleyway behind the estate's kitchen, right where the staff exited to catch the late-night bus. He wanted to see the mask slip. He wanted to see how the help treated a man who could offer them nothing but the stench of poverty. He stepped out into the storm through a side gate, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cold hit him like a physical blow, soaking through the thin rags of his disguise. He looked down at his hands. The nails were broken, stained with artificial dirt. He looked like a man the world had chewed up and spat out. As he settled into the shadows of the alley, shivering violently as the temperature plummeted, he saw the heavy steel service door groan open. A sliver of warm yellow light spilled onto the wet asphalt. Ellen stepped out. She was wrapped in a thin, faded cardigan, clutching her handbag to her chest. Dominic pulled his hood lower, tucking his chin into his chest, preparing himself for the cold dismissal he felt certain was coming. He expected her to huddle away, to call security, or perhaps to simply walk past him as if he were a piece of discarded trash. Instead, she stopped. The silence between them was filled only by the roar of the rain and the rhythmic thud of Dominic's pulse. He held his breath, his eyes fixed on her sensible, waterlogged shoes. "Oh heavens," he heard her whisper, her voice barely audible over the wind. "You're freezing." Dominic froze. The script in his head, the one where she scoffed and hurried away, was suddenly missing its next line. He felt her move closer. The scent of lavender and lemon oil, the scent of his own home, drifted toward him. "Sir?" she asked softly. "Sir, are you all right?" Dominic didn't look up. He let out a low, pathetic moan, a sound of practiced misery. He expected a reprimand. He expected to be told to move along. What happened next would be the first crack in the fortress he had built around his heart. Ellen didn't reach for her phone to call the police. She reached into her bag and then he felt something warm and heavy being draped over his shivering shoulders. It was her cardigan. The only thing protecting her from the freezing night. "I don't have much," she said, her voice trembling slightly from the cold she was now fully exposed to. "But please, take this. And wait here. Just, please don't move." As she turned and ran back toward the service entrance, Dominic sat in the mud, stunned. The wool of the sweater was cheap, but the warmth it radiated felt more intense than the heated floors of his mansion. He felt a sudden, terrifying surge of a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. Guilt. Who was this woman? And why was she risking her own health for a man who looked like he had no soul left to save? Was this a performance? Or had he spent 3 years living with a stranger whose heart was far larger than his own bank account? The rain continued to hammer the pavement, but the chill Dominic felt now wasn't just from the weather. It was the internal shiver of a man realizing his compass might be pointing in the wrong direction. He clutched the thin, lavender-scented cardigan. It was pilled at the elbows and smelled of generic detergent, yet it felt like a holy relic in his grime-stained hands. He watched the service door. He expected her to return with a security guard to shoo him away. That was the logical conclusion. In Dominic's world, people only did favors if there was a camera rolling or a tax write-off involved. But when the door creaked open again, Ellen was alone. She was carrying a plastic Tupperware container and a thermos. She hurried toward him, her hair, usually pinned back in a severe professional bun, now plastered to her face in dark, frantic strands. She knelt in the mud beside him, ignoring the way the filth ruined her work slacks. "Eat this," she urged, her voice thick with a kindness that felt like a physical weight. "It's beef stew. I made it for my lunch tomorrow, but you need it more. It's still hot." Dominic took the container. His hands, though shaking from the act, were large and calloused, the hands of a builder who had turned his father's small construction firm into a global empire. He kept his head down, fearful that the sharp, predatory light in his blue eyes would give him away. "Thank you," he rasped. It wasn't a fake voice. His throat was actually constricted with a sudden, inexplicable knot of emotion. "I'm Ellen," she said softly, sitting back on her heels, seemingly oblivious to the torrential downpour. "I work here. In the big house." She looked up at the towering silhouette of the manor, and for a brief second, Dominic saw a flash of something in her expression. Not pride, but a weary sort of resignation. "Big house," Dominic muttered, playing the part. "Rich man lives there. Thorne Vance. He probably wouldn't like you helping me." Ellen let out a small, sad laugh that cut deeper than the wind. "Mr. Vance? He wouldn't even notice. He's a man who looks through people, not at them. I've cleaned his office every day for 3 years, and I don't think he knows what color my eyes are." Dominic felt a sting of rebuke. It was true. He had always prided himself on his efficiency, which was really just a polite word for treating people like furniture. He looked at Ellen properly now, peering from under the shadow of his hood. Ellen Ripley Snyder wasn't just a maid. As he watched her, he saw the lines of exhaustion around her mouth, the mark of someone who worked 18-hour days. He knew from her HR file, which he'd skimmed once, that she lived in a cramped apartment in a neighborhood he wouldn't drive his Bentley through. What the file didn't mention was the way she looked at the world. Despite her tired eyes, there was a fierce, protective dignity in the way she moved. "Why help?" Dominic asked, his voice a low growl. "I'm nothing. I can't pay you." Ellen reached out, her hand hovering just inches from his muddy sleeve before she pulled it back, respecting his space. "My mother used to say that how we treat the people who can do absolutely nothing for us is the only true map of our soul. Besides, everyone is someone's son. Someone somewhere is probably praying you're safe tonight. I'd want someone to do the same for my brother." "Your brother?" Dominic prodded. Her face softened, a momentary glow of affection breaking through the gloom. "Danny. He's special. He has a heart condition and the treatments are expensive. That's why I work the extra shifts here. Mr. Vance pays well even if he is a bit of a stone." She paused, realizing she was oversharing with a stranger. "I shouldn't talk about him like that. He's not a bad man, I think. Just a lonely one who forgot how to be human." A lonely man who forgot how to be human. The words rang in Dominic's head like a funeral bell. As they sat there, A black SUV with tinted windows slowly rolled past the alley entrance. It was Dominic's own security detail patrolling the perimeter. Dominic instinctively ducked further into the shadows. Ellen, however, stood up, placing herself between the car's headlights and the beggar, as if shielding him from a predator. "Don't worry," she whispered. "They won't bother you while I'm here." At that moment, Dominic saw the staggering irony of his life. He spent millions on security to protect his body, but this woman who had nothing was using her own body to protect his dignity. He looked at the Tupperware. The stew was rich, seasoned with herbs he recognized, thyme and rosemary from his own garden that she must have gathered with permission. As he took a bite, the warmth spread through him, but it brought a bitter realization. For years he had been searching for the leak in his company, the person selling secrets, the person who wasn't loyal. He had been looking in boardrooms and high-rise penthouses. He had never thought to look at the woman who scrubbed his floors. He had never realized that the most loyal person in his life was someone he hadn't even bothered to greet by name. "I have to go," Ellen said, checking an old, cracked wristwatch. "The last bus is coming. Please, keep the thermos. And there's a $20 bill tucked under the lid. It's all the cash I have until Friday, but you need a room tonight. There's a shelter 3 blocks down. Tell them Ellen sent you." She began to walk away, her figure disappearing into the misty veil of the rain. "Wait," Dominic called out, his voice cracking. She turned back, her silhouette framed by the street lamp. "Yes. Why, truly. Why give your last $20 to a man you don't know?" Ellen smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Dominic had ever seen. Not because of its perfection, but because of its sincerity. "Because, sir, I've spent my whole life being invisible. I know how much it hurts. I just wanted you to know that tonight someone saw you." She disappeared around the corner. Dominic sat in the mud, the $20 bill clutched in his hand. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry, a man who could buy and sell the street they were standing on. But as he sat there in the rain, wearing a maid's cheap cardigan and eating her stolen lunch, he realized he had never felt poorer in his entire life. He had set out to test her. He had expected to find a thief or a sycophant. Instead, he had found a mirror. And he didn't like the man looking back at him. But the test wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because as Dominic prepared to stand up and end the charade, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A man was stepping out from behind a dumpster further down the alley. He was dressed in a dark hoodie, and he had been watching the entire exchange. And in his hand he wasn't holding a sandwich or a cardigan. He was holding a heavy, silenced pistol. Dominic realized with a jolt of pure terror that his disguise might have worked too well. He wasn't just a beggar anymore. He was a witness. And the man in the hoodie was looking toward the corner where Ellen had just vanished. Is Dominic's paranoid test about to cost the only person who ever saw his humanity her life? Dominic's heart, which had been thawing under the warmth of Ellen's kindness, suddenly turned to a block of ice. The man in the shadows wasn't a common mugger. There was a calculated, lethal stillness to his posture that Dominic recognized from a lifetime of high-level security briefings. This was a professional. The assassin wasn't looking at Dominic. He was looking at the corner where Ellen had just disappeared. In an instant, Dominic's mind raced through the possibilities. Did someone find out about the test? Was this a hit on him? Or had Ellen stumbled into something she wasn't supposed to see during her late shifts at the manor? Either way, the woman who had just given a beggar her last $20 was now walking into a death trap. Dominic didn't think. He didn't weigh the risks to his secret identity or his billion-dollar reputation. He lunged forward, the heavy, mud-caked boots of his disguise thudding against the wet pavement. "Hey!" Dominic roared, his voice regaining the commanding boom of the boardroom. The man in the hoodie spun around, the silenced pistol leveling toward Dominic's chest. The billionaire didn't stop. He tackled the man with the raw, unrefined strength of a man who had spent his youth on construction sites before he ever sat behind a mahogany desk. They crashed into a pile of wooden pallets, the splintering wood echoing like or gunfire in the narrow alley. The pistol skittered across the wet asphalt, sliding into a storm drain with a metallic clink. The stranger growled, a guttural sound of frustration, and slammed a fist into Dominic's jaw. Stars exploded in Dominic's vision. He tasted copper. For the first time in 20 years, Dominic Toretto Vance was bleeding, and it wasn't because of a market crash. "You should have stayed in the dirt, old man," the attacker hissed, reaching into his boot for a secondary blade. But the distraction had worked. The bus had arrived at the corner. Dominic saw the flash of the yellow lights and heard the hiss of the air brakes. He saw Ellen step onto the bus, safe, oblivious to the struggle happening 40 yards behind her. With a surge of adrenaline, Dominic kicked out, catching the attacker in the knee. The man buckled and Dominic scrambled back, putting distance between them. He knew he couldn't win a sustained fight against a trained killer in his current physical state, but he didn't have to. The security SUV he'd seen earlier was looping back. "Over here," Dominic yelled, waving his arms as the headlights swept into the alley. The attacker didn't hesitate. Seeing the armored vehicle approaching, he pulled his hood lower and vanished over a chain-link fence with the agility of a shadow. The SUV screeched to a halt and two massive men in tactical gear jumped out, weapons drawn. They found a man who looked like a derelict, covered in mud and blood, clutching a maid's lavender cardigan to his chest. "Sir?" one of the guards, Kobe Bryant Gordon, asked, his voice trembling with shock as he recognized the billionaire beneath the grime. "Mr. Vance? What happened?" "We heard shouting." "Follow that bus," Dominic gasped, pointing toward the main road where the tail lights were fading into the mist. "The number 42. Follow it. Do not let it out of your sight. If so much as a shadow touches the woman who just boarded, I will have your heads." "Sir, you're injured," the other guard insisted, reaching for his radio to call an ambulance. "I said follow the bus." Dominic screamed, the authority in his voice so absolute it made the guards flinch. They scrambled back into the vehicle. Dominic climbed into the leather interior, his filth staining the cream-colored upholstery he'd paid $60,000 for. He didn't care. He watched through the tinted glass as they trailed the bus at a safe distance. He watched Ellen through the bus window. She was sitting near the back, her head leaning against the glass, her shoulders slumped with the weight of her life. She looked so small, so fragile, yet she was the only person who had stood between him and the cold tonight. As the bus moved through the city, Dominic's mind was a whirlwind. This wasn't a random mugging. The man had a silenced weapon, a professional's tool. Someone was targeting his household. Was it a message to him? Or was Ellen Ripley Snyder more than just a maid with a golden heart? He looked down at the Tupperware container still gripped in his hand. He realized with a jolt of terror that if he hadn't played this game, if he hadn't decided to test her tonight, Ellen would have walked to that bus stop alone. She would have been a defenseless target for a man who didn't miss. The bus pulled into a dilapidated terminal in a part of the city Dominic had spent his career trying to redevelop, which usually meant tearing down the homes of people like Ellen. He watched her step off, looking tired and cold without her cardigan. She began the long walk toward a crumbling apartment complex. "Stay with her," Dominic ordered Kobe. "Watch the perimeter of that building. If that man shows up, neutralize him. I'm going back to the manor. I need to know who she really is." "Sir," Kobe hesitated. "We ran her background check 3 years ago. She's clean. No priors, no debt other than medical bills for her brother." "Look deeper," Dominic snapped. "Look into every phone call, every email, every person she's spoken to in the last month. And get me the security footage from the kitchen corridor. I want to see what she was doing before she walked out that door tonight." Dominic arrived back at his mansion an hour later. He bypassed the main entrance, heading straight for his private study. He stripped off the rags, the lavender cardigan falling to the floor. He caught his reflection in the mirror, bruised, bloodied, and raw. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, accessing the encrypted internal server. He pulled up the kitchen cameras. He watched the footage of Ellen from 2 hours ago. He expected to see her sneaking around, perhaps looking for a spare key or eyeing the silver. Instead, he saw her carefully portioning out the beef stew. He watched as she took a small piece of bread, his expensive artisanal sourdough, and wrapped it in a napkin. She looked at the camera for a brief second and Dominic saw the expression on her face. It wasn't greed. It was guilt. She was stealing a piece of bread to give to the man she thought was starving in the alley. Then he saw it. In the corner of the frame, a shadow moved. A man in a suit, one of Dominic's own executive assistants, was standing in the doorway of the pantry watching Ellen. He wasn't just watching, he was holding a thumb drive. When Ellen turned her back to grab her bag, the assistant slipped the drive into the pocket of her coat, the coat she was currently wearing. Dominic's blood turned to fire. Ellen wasn't a target because of who she was. She was being used as a mule. His own staff was using the invisible Maid to smuggle trade secrets or encrypted data out of the house, knowing that security never checked the domestic staff's pockets. The man in the alley hadn't been there to mug a beggar. He had been there to retrieve the drive from Ellen. And in his world, retrieving usually meant leaving no witnesses behind. Dominic slumped back in his chair, a horrifying realization washing over him. His paranoia had been right. There was a traitor in his house. But his target had been wrong. While he was busy suspecting the woman who gave him her last $20, the real vipers were sitting at his boardroom table, using her kindness as a cloak for their greed. He had put her in the crosshairs. And now the only way to save her was to keep the beggar alive long enough to expose the billionaire's secrets. Can Dominic protect Ellen without revealing his true identity, or will the traitors within his own walls finish what they started in the alley? Dominic stared at the frozen frame on his monitor. The executive assistant, a man named Peter Parker Vaughan, was someone Dominic had mentored, a man he had given a six-figure salary and a corner office. Seeing him slip that drive into Ellen's pocket was a betrayal that tasted like ash. But the anger was quickly eclipsed by a cold, sharp focus. If Peter was the one planting the data, then the man in the alley was his cleaner. The stakes had just shifted from a personal test of character to a high-stakes game of corporate espionage where Ellen was the unwilling and unaware pawn. "Kobe, talk to me," Dominic barked into his secure comms unit. "Sir, she's inside her apartment," Kobe's voice crackled. "The building is a fortress of neglect. Minimal lighting, broken locks. We're positioned on the roof of the bodega across the street. No sign of the hoodie yet, but the neighborhood is crawling with activity. It's not safe for her here, sir. Not tonight." "Don't move her yet," Dominic ordered, his mind spinning like a high-speed processor. "If we snatch her now, we spook the vipers in the house. We need to know who Peter is working for. I want you to keep a visual on her window. If she so much as looks uncomfortable, you go in." Dominic spent the next 4 hours in a fever of activity. He didn't wash the grime from his face. He wanted the sting of the bruise on his jaw to remind him of his failure. He pulled Peter Parker Vaughan's private phone records, bypassing every legal firewall with a few keystrokes. What he found made his grip tighten on the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. Peter wasn't just stealing data. He was selling the coordinates of Dominic's private transport routes to a rival conglomerate. They didn't just want his money, they wanted his life. Anne Ellen, the woman who had shared her lunch with a beggar, was currently carrying the encryption keys that would unlock Dominic's entire empire. By 4 a.m. Dominic couldn't sit still. He looked at the lavender cardigan draped over his chair. He felt a pull toward that dilapidated apartment complex that had nothing to do with data or secrets. He needed to know she was okay. He needed to see the woman who saw him. He donned a slightly cleaner version of his disguise, darker, less ragged, but still enough to blend into the shadows of the north side. He slipped out of the manor through the same service gate. When he arrived at the apartment complex, the air was thick with the smell of exhaust and old grease. He found Kobe in the shadows of an alcove. "She hasn't left," Kobe whispered. "But sir, look." He handed Dominic a pair of high-powered night vision binoculars. Dominic looked up at the third floor. In the window of Unit 3B he saw Ellen. She wasn't sleeping. She was sitting at a small kitchen table, the light from a single flickering bulb illuminating her face. She was holding the $20 bill, the one Dominic had returned to her pocket when he tackled the assassin. She was staring at it, her expression a mix of confusion and wonder. Beside her sat a young man in a wheelchair, her brother, Danny. Dominic watched as she moved her lips, seemingly telling Danny about the man in the alley. She reached out and ruffled her brother's hair, a gesture of such pure, uncomplicated love that it made Dominic's chest ache. Then the tension snapped. A black sedan with no plates rolled slowly down the street, its headlights extinguished. It stopped 2 doors down from Ellen's building. 3 men stepped out. They weren't dressed like street thugs. They wore tactical vests and carried submachine guns. "They're moving in," Kobe hissed, his hand going to his holster. "Wait," Dominic said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "They don't know we're here. If we engage in the street, they might take her hostage. We go in through the fire escape. I want to be inside that room before they reach the door." "Sir, it's too dangerous for you." I am the only one who can talk her down without her screaming for the police, Dominic snapped. Move. They scrambled up the rusted iron slats of the fire escape, the metal groaning under their weight. Dominic reached the third-floor landing just as he heard the heavy thud of a shoulder hitting a door in the hallway. Frick. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the thin walls. Dominic smashed the kitchen window with his elbow and vaulted inside. Ellen screamed, pulling Danny's wheelchair back toward the bedroom. Stay back, she shrieked, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. Her eyes were wide with terror, but even in her fear she stood firmly in front of her brother. Ellen. It's me. Dominic yelled, throwing back his hood. She froze. The flickering light caught his face, the dirt, the bruise, the silver hair. The man from the alley? There are men in the hall, Dominic said, his voice urgent but steady. They aren't here for your money, Ellen. They're here for what's in your coat pocket. You have to trust me. How do you know my name? She gasped, her knuckles white on the skillet. Who are you? Before he could answer, the bedroom door exploded inward. The lead mercenary stepped through, his weapon leveled at Ellen's chest. The drive lady, the man growled. Give it over and maybe the kid lives. Dominic didn't hesitate. He didn't have a gun, but he had a lifetime of knowing exactly where a man's weakness lay. He grabbed the heavy marble cutting board from Ellen's counter, a piece of furniture she likely prized, and hurled it with pinpoint accuracy. It caught the mercenary in the throat, sending him reeling back. Kobe scrambled through the window behind Dominic, his own weapon silenced and ready. A frantic, muffled firefight broke out in the narrow hallway of the apartment. Ellen was hyperventilating, her arms wrapped around Danny. What is happening? Who are these people? Dominic moved to her, ignoring the chaos in the hall. He took her by the shoulders, his expensive silk-lined sleeves, visible now that his coat was open, clashing with the grime on his face. Ellen, look at me, he commanded. I am Dominic Vance. I am the man you work for. I am the man who lives in the big house. And I am the man you saved tonight. The shock that crossed her face was more profound than the fear of the gunman. She looked from his eyes to his hands, then down to the lavender cardigan that he had tucked into his belt. You. She whispered. You're the billionaire? You were testing me. The hurt in her voice was a physical blow. It was a revelation of a different kind, a betrayal of the one thing she had offered him freely, her humanity. I was a fool, Dominic said, and for the first time in his life he meant it. But right now I need you to be the hero you were 3 hours ago. Give me your coat. She handed it over, her movements mechanical with shock. Dominic reached into the pocket and pulled out the small black thumb drive. He looked at it, a tiny piece of plastic that had nearly cost this woman everything. Kobe. Status. Dominic yelled over his shoulder. 2 down, 1 fled. Kobe shouted from the hall. But they'll have backup blocks away. We have to move, sir. Now. Dominic turned back to Ellen and Danny. You're coming with me. To the manor. It's the only place I can keep you safe. I'm not going anywhere with you, Ellen said, her voice trembling but fierce. You lied to me. You sat in the dirt and watched me give you my last cent just to see if I was good enough for your house? You aren't the man I thought I was helping. That man had a soul. You just have a checkbook. Dominic looked at her, and the rising tension in the room wasn't just about the mercenaries outside. It was about the crumbling of the only bridge he had ever built to another person. You're right, Dominic said softly. But if you stay here they will kill you. Not for the drive but because you've seen their faces. Please, Ellen. For Danny. She looked at her brother, then back at the man she had fed in the rain. With a look of pure, cold disappointment she nodded. As they hurried down the fire escape toward the waiting armored SUV, Dominic realized that the midpoint of this journey had been reached. He had found the traitors, he had found the drive, and he had saved the girl. But as he looked at the silhouette of his own massive manor on the hill, he realized the greatest revelation was still to come. Because the drive he held in his hand didn't just contain corporate secrets. It contained a name of the person who had hired Peter Parker Vaughn. And that name was about to change everything Dominic thought he knew about his own family. The drive back to the Thorn Blackwood Manor was conducted in a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Dominic sat in the back of the armored SUV, still covered in the filth of the street, while Ellen and Danny sat opposite him. Ellen kept her gaze fixed out the window, her hand tightly gripping Danny's. She didn't look at the luxury leather or the glowing screens. She looked like a woman who had been invited into a palace only to find out the floors were made of glass. "Ellen," Dominic started, his voice rough. "Don't," she snapped, her eyes flashing with a sudden sharp fire as she finally looked at him. "Don't billionaire me, Mr. Vance. You got what you wanted, didn't you? You saw that the maid isn't a thief. You saw that I'm loyal. I hope the show was worth the $20. Dominic looked down at his hands. "It wasn't a show. It was a mistake. I've spent my life surrounded by people who smile while they sharpen their knives. I forgot that some people just smile." They arrived at the manor and Dominic bypassed the staff entrance, leading them through the grand front foyer. The marble floors that Ellen had spent years polishing now echoed under her own shoes. "Kobe, take Danny to the medical wing," Dominic ordered. "I want my private physicians to look at his heart monitors. Give him anything he needs." "No," Ellen said firmly. "He stays with me." "Ellen, he's safe here," Dominic said, his voice softening. "The medical wing is the most secure part of the house. I need to go to my study and see what's on this drive. If I'm right, the person who put you in danger is still under this roof. I can't protect you if I don't know who I'm fighting." Ellen looked at Danny, who gave her a small, tired nod. She finally let go of the wheelchair, watching as Kobe wheeled him away. Then she turned to Dominic. "I'm coming with you. If my life was the one being traded for that piece of plastic, I have a right to see what's on it." Dominic nodded. He led her to his inner sanctum, a room of dark wood, rare books, and a computer system that cost more than the apartment building they had just fled. He slid the black thumb drive into the port. "This is the encryption key Peter was planting," Dominic explained, his fingers flying across the keys. "It's designed to bypass my dead man's switch, a security protocol that wipes my servers if I'm ever compromised." As the files began to decrypt, a series of folders appeared on the screen. Dominic opened the one labeled Project Phoenix. His breath hitched. It wasn't just corporate data. It was a ledger. A list of payments made to Peter Parker Vaughan over the last 18 months. Dominic scrolled to the bottom looking for the source of the funds. He expected to see a rival tech firm or a foreign conglomerate. Instead, the name at the bottom of the wire transfer was Clarissa Thorne Vance. Dominic felt the air leave his lungs. Clarissa. His sister. The woman he had raised after their parents died. The woman he had placed on the board of directors to ensure her future was secure. "Your sister," Ellen whispered, reading the name over his shoulder. "Why would she do this? She has everything." "Because everything isn't enough for Clarissa," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low hum. "She doesn't want a seat at the table. She wants the table. And she wants me off the board." But as he scrolled further, the true revelation hit him. The one that shifted the story from a betrayal of business to a betrayal of the soul. He opened a subfolder titled, Personnel Disposal. Inside was a list of names. Staff members who had been fired or disappeared over the last year after being used as mules. And at the very top of the list, marked with a red digital X, was Ellen Ripley Snyder. Beside her name was a note in Peter's handwriting. Subject is a high-risk witness. Does not accept bribes. Disposal scheduled for bus terminal intercept. Finalizing with outside contractor. Dominic felt a wave of nausea. His sister hadn't just used Ellen. She had ordered her execution because she knew Ellen was too honest to be bought. Clarissa had bet on Ellen's goodness being her downfall. "She knew," Dominic whispered, turning to Ellen. "She knew you were the only one who wouldn't take a bribe. She picked you because you were a good person, Ellen. She used your virtue as a target." Ellen stared at the screen, the reality of her life being reduced to a personnel disposal note sinking in. She began to shake, not with fear but with a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. "I thought I was just invisible," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know I was a ghost in waiting." Dominic stood up, moving toward her. He didn't think about the test, or the money. He saw the woman who had stood in a rainstorm to give a stranger a cardigan, and he saw the monstrous machinery of his own world trying to crush her. He reached out and took her hands. This time she didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time, the word didn't feel like a corporate apology. It felt like a confession. "I spent so long looking for enemies that I didn't see the one in my own blood." And I spent so long ignoring the help that I didn't see the hero living in my own house. The vulnerability in his eyes, the raw, unmasked Dominic Vance, was more than Ellen was prepared for. She saw the billionaire, yes, but she also saw the beggar from the alley, the man who was truly deeply alone. In the quiet of the study, the distance between them vanished. The shared trauma of the night and the revelation of the betrayal acted as a bridge. For a moment they weren't employer and maid, billionaire and beggar. They were just two people standing in the wreckage of their expectations. Suddenly the intercom on Dominic's desk buzzed. It was Kobe and his voice was frantic. "Sir, get out of the study. We have a breach in the medical wing. It's not the mercenaries, it's the internal security team. They've locked down the house. Clarissa's here, sir. And she's with Peter." The lights in the study flickered and then died, plunging them into a terrifying, oppressive darkness. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, the electronic lock engaging with a final, chilling thud. Dominic pulled Ellen close to him as the monitors on his desk flared back to life. But it wasn't his desktop that appeared. It was a live feed of the medical wing. Clarissa was standing over Danny's bed, her hand resting almost gently on his oxygen line. She looked directly into the camera, a cold, triumphant smile on her face. "Hello, Dominic," her voice echoed through the room's speakers. "I hear you've been playing dress-up. I think it's time we discuss the terms of your retirement. Or should we discuss Danny's future instead?" Dominic's grip on Ellen's hand tightened until it was painful. The stakes had reached their highest point. His sister had his heart, his secrets, and now the only family Ellen had left. Is Dominic's empire worth more than the life of the boy whose sister saved him? And can he find a way to outmaneuver the woman who shares his own ruthless blood? The silence in the darkened study was absolute, save for the ragged sound of Ellen's breathing. On the monitor, the cold, clinical blue light of the medical wing illuminated Clarissa's face. She looked like a queen surveying a conquered territory, her hand still hovering with terrifying casualness over Danny's life support interface. "Dominic," Clarissa's voice purred through the speakers, "you always had a flair for the dramatic, but this little masquerade with the rags and the rain? It's beneath you. You've let your sentimentality for the common folk cloud your judgment. You've brought a stray into our home and now that stray has something of mine." Dominic stepped toward the screen, his face a mask of cold fury. "She has nothing of yours, Clarissa. He has the truth. And the truth is that you're a murderer in a designer suit." "Labels are for people who can't afford to rewrite history," Clarissa countered, her smile never wavering. "Peter, dear, be a doll and explain the situation to our guests." The camera panned slightly to reveal Peter Parker Vaughan standing behind her. He looked shaken, his usual polished veneer cracked by the violence of the night, but his ambition was still visible in the way he held his head. "Mr. Vance, the house is in full lockdown. The external security team has been replaced. Every server, every asset and every exit is under the board's control, specifically Clarissa's control. You are currently a trespasser in your own home." Ellen stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Leave my brother alone. He has nothing to do with your boardrooms or your money. He's just a boy." Clarissa looked at Ellen through the camera, her expression one of genuine, terrifying pity. "Oh honey, in this house, everything is a lever. And right now your brother is the most effective lever we have. Dominic, give Peter the drive. No. Or I'll have the doctors adjust Danny's medication." A simple mistake in dosage. Tragic really, but so common in high-stress situations. Dominic felt a coldness in his veins that no Seattle rain could match. He looked at Ellen. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the raw, agonizing fear for the one person she lived for. He looked at the drive in his hand, the key to his legacy, the proof of his life's work. If he gave them the drive, he lost everything. His company, his reputation, his safety. They would kill him and Ellen the moment the data was secure. If he didn't give it to them, Danny would die within minutes. "Dominic," Ellen whispered, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "Please." For the first time in his life, the great Dominic Vance felt completely and utterly powerless. He was a man who moved markets, who bent world leaders to his will, but he couldn't stop his sister's finger from pressing a button 3 floors away. "I'll give it to you," Dominic said, his voice sounding hollow like a ghost's. "Just don't hurt him." "Smart boy," Clarissa said. "Peter will meet you at the study door." Slide the drive through the document slot. Once he verifies the encryption keys, we'll discuss your departure. Dominic walked to the door. His movements were heavy, defeated. He looked at the black thumb drive. This was the end of the empire. He reached for the document slot but his hands stopped. He turned back to look at Ellen. She was huddled by the desk, her face buried in her hands. The sight of her, the woman who had given her last $20 to a man she thought was a beggar, broke something inside him. He had spent his whole life building walls to keep people out, but in doing so he had built a prison for himself. He realized then that Clarissa was right about one thing. He had been playing dress-up. But not as a beggar. He had been playing dress-up as a titan of industry, pretending that numbers on a screen mattered more than the warmth of a human soul. He didn't slide the drive through the slot. Dominic. Peter's muffled voice came from the other side of the door. The drive. Now. Dominic looked at the camera. Clarissa, you think you know me. You think you know how this ends because you think I'm just like you. But I'm not. I've seen something tonight that you'll never understand. I've seen dignity that doesn't have a price tag. Don't be a martyr, Dominic, Clarissa snapped, her patience finally fraying. It doesn't suit your complexion. Give him the drive or the boy dies. I'm counting to 5. 1. Dominic looked at the drive. Then with a sudden violent motion he smashed it against the edge of the mahogany desk. The plastic shattered. The delicate circuit board snapped in half. 2. Ellen let out a choked sob. 3. Dominic grabbed a heavy iron fire poker from beside the hearth. He wasn't a tech genius anymore. He wasn't a billionaire. He was a man protecting his own. 4. Clarissa. Dominic roared. If you touch that boy, I will burn this house to the ground with us all inside it. You want the company? You want the throne? You'll have to rule over the ashes. 5. On the screen, Clarissa's face hardened into a mask of pure, icy malice. She turned toward the medical monitor. Her hand moved toward the emergency stop button on the oxygen flow. Goodbye, Danny, she whispered. She pressed the button. The screen went black. The hum of the computer died. The entire study plunged into a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Ellen fell to her knees, a silent, heart-wrenching scream tearing through her. Dominic dropped the poker, his knees hitting the floor beside her. He had gambled with a life that wasn't his and he had lost. In the darkness of the darkest hour, Dominic Vance realized the ultimate crushing truth. He had finally found something worth more than his billions and he had let it slip through his fingers. He held Ellen as she sobbed, the two of them huddled together in the ruins of a life built on marble and ice. He had tried to test a maid's heart and in the process he had discovered his own, only to have it shattered by the very world he had created. Is Danny truly gone, or did Dominic's final act of defiance spark a miracle he never saw coming? And how will they survive when the doors finally open? The darkness in the study was suffocating, a heavy shroud over the sound of Ellen's broken sobs. Dominic held her, his forehead resting against hers, feeling the crushing weight of a failure that no amount of money could ever repair. He had spent his life winning, but in this moment he felt like the smallest man on earth. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. Ellen, I'm so... Beep. A single high-pitched electronic chirp cut through the silence. Dominic's head snapped up. It didn't come from the dead monitors. It came from the wall, the emergency secondary relay hidden behind a panel of mahogany. Then came another sound, the hiss of a pneumatic vent. Dominic. Ellen gasped, wiping her eyes. What is that? The fail-safe, Dominic breathed, a spark of sudden desperate hope igniting in his chest. Clarissa thought she knew my systems, but she only knew the ones I let her see. When I smashed that drive, it triggered a black site protocol. It didn't just cut the power. It isolated the medical wing's life support onto a closed-loop mechanical system that can't be controlled by the network. The monitors didn't flicker back on, but a small green LED light on the wall began to pulse. She didn't kill him, Dominic said, grabbing Ellen's shoulders, his eyes wild with a frantic clarity. She pressed the button, but the system ignored her. Danny is still breathing, Ellen. The isolation protocol kicked in the moment the primary server detected a breach. Is he safe? Ellen grabbed his lapels, her voice a mixture of terror and hope. For now. But the house is still locked down and Clarissa will realize the trick soon. We have minutes before she sends her men in here to finish us the old-fashioned way. Dominic scrambled to his feet, pulling Ellen up with him. He moved to the fireplace, reaching deep into the flue to pull a lever he hadn't touched in a decade. A section of the bookshelf ground open, revealing a cramped, stone-walled passage. "This leads to the old servant tunnels," Dominic explained. "They were built in the 1920s. They aren't on any digital map. Clarissa doesn't even know they exist." "We have to get to Danny," Ellen said, the grief in her face replaced by a fierce maternal determination. "We will. But first we need a weapon." "Not a gun, Ellen. Something more powerful." They descended into the tunnels, the air smelling of dust and cold earth. As they moved through the darkness, guided only by the light of Dominic's phone, the billionaire looked at the woman beside him. She was covered in mud, her hair was a mess, and she had every reason to hate him. Yet here she was, moving into the heart of danger to save her brother, and, in a way, to save him. "Why are you still here?" Dominic asked, his voice echoing off the damp stones. "After what I did. The test, the lies." Ellen stopped, looking at him in the dim light. "Because, Dominic, when you were in that alley, I didn't see a billionaire. I saw a man who was cold. And just now when you smashed that drive, I didn't see a businessman. I saw a man who was willing to lose everything to try and save a boy he didn't even know." She reached out, her hand grazing the bruise on his jaw. "You're a terrible billionaire, Dominic. But you're starting to be a decent human being. Don't make me regret saying that." They reached a heavy iron grate that looked up into the medical wing's supply closet. Dominic pushed it aside and they hauled themselves up. The wing was silent, bathed in the eerie red glow of the emergency lights. Dominic moved to a terminal that looked like a simple inventory screen. He began typing with a rhythmic, focused speed. "What are you doing?" Ellen whispered, guarding the door. "Clarissa thinks she's won because she has the board and the house. But she forgot who built the infrastructure of this city. I'm not just restarting the power, Ellen. I'm broadcasting." "Broadcasting what?" Dominic looked at her, a grim, triumphant smile touching his lips. "The internal security footage. The ledger from the drive. I backed it up to a physical cloud server before I smashed the plastic. And most importantly, the audio of Clarissa threatening to kill a child on life support." He hit the enter key with a finality that felt like a gavel coming down. "Every news outlet in Seattle, every member of the board, and every police station within 50 miles just received a live feed of this house," Dominic said. "The Vipers aren't in control anymore. They're in a cage." Suddenly, the door to the medical wing hissed open. Peter Parker Vaughn stepped in, his face pale, holding a tablet that was screaming with notifications. "Dominic, what have you done?" "My phone. The servers. It's everywhere." Dominic stepped out from behind the terminal, his stature seemingly doubling in the red light. "It's over, Peter. You can run or you can stay and wait for the tactical teams that are currently 5 minutes out. But if you move toward that boy's room, I won't need a failsafe to stop you." Ellen didn't wait. She ran past Peter, sprinting toward Danny's room. She burst through the door and saw her brother, his chest rising and falling in a steady, beautiful rhythm. He was alive. She fell to her knees beside his bed, clutching his hand and weeping, not with the despair of the study, but with a relief so profound it felt like a rebirth. Dominic stood in the doorway watching them. He saw the way the light caught Ellen's face, and he realized that the shock he had set out to find at the beginning of his test was nothing compared to the shock of finding himself. He had lost his company. He had lost his sister. He had lost his anonymity. But as Ellen looked up at him and mouthed the words, "Thank you," Dominic Vance realized he had finally found something that was actually worth keeping. The cavalry is coming, but the final confrontation with Clarissa remains. Is Dominic ready to face his own blood to secure Ellen's future? The sirens were a distant wail against the Seattle wind, but inside the manor, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and the electrical hum of a dying empire. Dominic didn't wait for the police. He knew Clarissa. She was a cornered predator, and a predator in a cage is at her most lethal. "Kobe!" Dominic shouted into the hallway. The guard appeared from the shadows, his tactical gear scorched but his eyes steady. "Secure the medical wing. Nobody gets in or out except the paramedics. Ellen, stay with Danny. Lock the door from the inside." "Dominic, wait," Ellen called out, standing up from Danny's bedside. She hurried to him, her eyes searching his. "Don't go alone." She's lost everything, she has nothing left to lose. Dominic looked at her, really looked at her. The pilled lavender cardigan she had draped over him was now a tattered rag on his desk, but the warmth of it seemed to have moved permanently into his chest. I started this with a lie, Ellen. I have to finish it with the truth. Stay safe. He turned and strode toward the great hall. The mansion's lights were flickering, a strobing battle between Dominic's secondary protocols and Clarissa's fading control. As he entered the massive marble-floored hall, he saw her. Clarissa was standing at the top of the twin staircases, silhouetted against the storm raging outside the high windows. She wasn't fleeing. She was holding a glass of vintage wine, watching the news ticker on a giant screen that she had managed to override. Her own face was on the screen, frozen in the moment she had threatened Danny's life. "You always were a petty man, Dominic," she said, her voice echoing through the hollow space. "To throw away $1 trillion legacy for a maid and a cripple? It's almost poetic in its stupidity." "The legacy was built on sand, Clarissa," Dominic said, stopping at the base of the stairs. He looked up at her, the blood on his face and the grime on his hands making him look more like a king than he ever had in a tuxedo. "I spent my life testing people because I was afraid they were all like you. I was wrong. There are people who give when they have nothing. And there are people who take when they have everything. I'm done being the latter. You think the police will stop me?" Clarissa laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "I have accounts they'll never find. I have friends who owe me favors that transcend the law." "You had them," Dominic corrected. "But the broadcast didn't just go to the police. It went to the shareholders. It went to the SE. And it went to the friends you think you have. In our world, Clarissa, the only thing more contagious than wealth is a scandal that can't be covered up. You're a liability now. And you know what we do with liabilities." Clarissa's hand trembled, the wine splashing over the rim of the glass. For the first time, the icy composure shattered. She looked at the monitors, at the flashing red lights of the police cruisers now visible in the driveway. "I'll kill you before I let you take this house," she hissed, reaching into the waistband of her skirt for a small, pearl-handled revolver. But she was slow. The exhaustion of the night and the weight of her own hubris had dulled her reflexes. Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't move. Because behind Clarissa, a shadow emerged from the service corridor. It was Peter Parkervon. He looked like a man who had realized the ship was sinking and was desperate for a lifeboat. "It's over, Clarissa," Peter said, his voice shaking. He held up a tablet. "I've turned state's evidence. I've given them the offshore codes. I won't go down for a murder you ordered." Clarissa spun around, her eyes wide with the shock of 1,000 betrayals. In that moment of distraction, the heavy front doors of the manor were breached. Police. Hands in the air. The hall was suddenly flooded with tactical light and the thunder of boots. Clarissa dropped the glass. It shattered on the marble, the red wine looking exactly like the blood she had been so willing to spill. She was swarmed by officers, her screams of protest drowned out by the mechanical efficiency of justice. Dominic stood in the center of it all. He felt a hand on his arm. He turned to find Ellen standing there. She had Danny's wheelchair pushed in front of her. The boy was awake, his eyes wide but curious, his hand tucked into his sister's. The billionaire looked at the maid. The prominent billionaire and the beggar were gone. There was only a man and a woman standing in the wreckage of a house that was finally becoming a home. "Is it finished?" Ellen asked softly. Dominic looked at his sister being led away in cuffs, then back at the boy whose life had been a lever. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the pilled lavender cardigan he'd retrieved from the study. He handed it back to her. "No," Dominic said, a genuine, tired smile finally breaking across his face. "I think it's just beginning." He turned to the lead detective, but before he spoke he looked at the camera lens of a nearby security bot he knew was still broadcasting. "I have a statement," he said to the world. "My name is Dominic Vance. And I'd like to introduce you to the person who actually owns this house. Not by deed but by heart." Part 9. Satisfying conclusion. The morning sun finally broke through the Seattle mist, casting long, golden fingers across the marble floors of the manor. The sirens had faded into the distance, replaced by the tranquil chirping of birds in the manicured gardens. The house, once a fortress of cold suspicion, felt lighter, as if the very walls had exhaled a century of secrets. Dominic stood on the grand terrace, no longer wearing the rags of a beggar or the stiff armored suits of a tycoon. He wore a simple sweater and slacks, looking more at peace than he had in decades. He watched as a specialized medical transport van pulled into the circular drive, not to take Danny away, but to bring in a team of world-class cardiac specialists Dominic had hired to oversee Danny's recovery in the comfort of the estate. "He's sleeping," Ellen's voice drifted out from the French doors. She stepped onto the terrace, looking rested for the first time since Dominic had known her. She was wearing a new coat Dominic had insisted on, not a bribe but a gift of warmth. Dominic turned to her, the sharp, predatory edge of his gaze replaced by a soft, genuine warmth. "The doctors say the new valve procedure is a 98% success rate. He'll be playing soccer in the garden by midsummer, Ellen." Ellen leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out over the water. "I still don't know how to thank you, Dominic. You've changed our entire world in a single night." "You have it backward," Dominic said softly, stepping closer. "I spent my life believing that the only way to be safe was to be alone. I thought wealth was a shield, but it was actually a blindfold. You didn't just save me from an assassin, Ellen. You saved me from becoming the man Clarissa is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. For a moment, Ellen's breath hitched, but when he opened it, it wasn't a ring. It was a gold key, an old-fashioned skeleton key that matched the locks of the manor's original doors. "I've spent the morning restructuring the Thornvance Foundation," Dominic explained. "It's no longer a tax haven. It's now a dedicated fund for low-income housing and medical debt relief. And I want you to be the director, Ellen. No more cleaning floors unless it's for fun. I need someone who knows what it's like to be invisible to lead the effort in making sure no one else is." Ellen looked at the key, then up at him, her eyes shimmering with tears of joy. "You're serious? You'd trust me with that?" "I've tested a lot of people in my life, Ellen," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a tender whisper. "You're the only one who didn't just pass the test. You changed the teacher. I trust you more than I trust myself." As they stood there, the distance between them, the miles of class, money and history, finally dissolved. It wasn't about a billionaire and a maid anymore. It was about two souls who had found a home in each other's courage. In the weeks that followed, the Thorn Blackwood Manor transformed. The silence was replaced by the sound of Danny's laughter and the constant bustle of people dedicated to doing good. Clarissa and Peter faced the full weight of the law, their names becoming a cautionary tale of greed, while Dominic Vance became known for something far more valuable than his bank account: his heart. Dominic never did get his $20 back. Instead, he framed it. It hung in his private study, right next to a small framed photo of a woman in a lavender cardigan standing in the rain. It served as a daily reminder that the greatest discoveries aren't found in a ledger or a thumb drive. They are found in the simple, selfless moments of a stranger who sees you when you feel most lost. The billionaire who once pretended to be a beggar finally had everything he ever wanted. Not because he owned the world, but because he had finally learned how to live in it. And that, my friends, is the power of a pure heart. Dominic and Ellen's journey shows us that no matter how much you have, you're only truly rich when you have someone to share it with. I hope this story moved you as much as it moved me. If you loved this 40-minute emotional journey, please give us a big thumbs up. What was your favorite part of the story? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts. And if you haven't joined our storytelling family yet, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you're the first to see our next big adventure. Thank you for watching, and remember, always be kind because you never know whose life you might be changing forever. See you in the next story.